Here's some news. America is having a reasoned, healthy debate about the cause of the Civil War. The year now is 1866, and the losing enemy, the Confederacy, was no, it couldn't be 2017. That's this year. Oh yes, I see. Here's some old news. The Civil War was caused by slavery. And here's some news. The president, the chief of staff, press secretary, and a large portion of the population seems to think it wasn't. We as a nation are having a crisis of both fake news and fake history, relitigating the Civil War, defending Christopher Columbus, downplaying the genocide of Native Americans and taking of their lands, and it's bizarre. And Thanksgiving is coming up, so we thought it would be a good opportunity to get into our country's history of war, racism, genocide, and f***ing football. But first we have to back up, because in 2017 we need to relitigate all of documented history in order to discuss simple topics. For example, whenever Columbus Day rolls around, many point out that Christopher Columbus was actually an idiot and dum-dum who didn't actually discover America or prove the Earth was round, thought the planet was smaller than everyone else said it was, turned out to be wrong, then abused and enslaved the natives for the purposes of acquiring gold from their land. And those are just the facts. And that should be the end of it, you'd think. Okay, Christopher Columbus was a savage man who didn't discover North America, didn't prove the Earth was round, did enslave and brutalize the nice people he found. There are journal entries literally from him describing the natives being kind and bringing them things, having no knowledge of guns so they'd be easy to enslave, and then he went back to Spain to get more ships to load up with slaves, and then brutally forced others to mine for gold. On his face and in his skull, Christopher Columbus isn't worth taking a whole day to celebrate. And that's it. We're done? Apparently not, because every Columbus Day, the right tends to point out other general sort of half-truths about generally Native Americans, or history in general, to dismiss the idea that Christopher Columbus, in videos called Thanksgiving, a politically incorrect guide, which is a weird way to spell historically. Instead of talking about Christopher Columbus of Columbus Day fame's actions in the 1490s, we hear things like, so, you think Native Americans were peaceful until Columbus showed up? Tell me again about scalping and cannibalism. Okay, come with me on a world of the imagination. Use your imaginer. Because, sorry, I thought we were talking about Christopher Columbus of Columbus Day fame and his actions around 1492, but okay, fine. Various Native Americans scalped their enemies from before 1492 to after 1492, and colonials offered bounties for scalps in the 1600s, but to be fair, at first the bounties were for heads. In 1756, Pennsylvania passed the Scalp Act for scalps. Confederate guerrillas scalped Union soldiers in the Civil War. Oh, right, the Civil War, we'll talk about that. But anyway, some tribes participated in cannibalism of their fallen enemies, and other tribes thought it was a real gross no-no. But again, what does that have to do with Columbus Day? Don't know, but hey, aside from Native Americans being brutally violent, the most brutally violent of everybody, from anywhere, they were also technologically regressive and didn't even use the wheel. Happy #Columbus Day. Well, first of all, regressive means they were becoming less advanced, not that they weren't as advanced as others, so nice try, word-wise. But some of them did invent a wheel. They just didn't use them for hauling because they hadn't domesticated draft animals yet. And also, Europeans didn't invent the wheel, Sumerians did. And then the concept spread across the continents over the next thousands of years. There's this idea of Native American savagery and settler superiority that perhaps can be best summed up by a video from Ben Shapiro's website, The Daily Wire. The video has since been removed, but it depicted the Native Americans as all violent savages and cannibals until Christopher Columbus arrived and kindly introduced them to eating utensils, which they already had, taught them how to build things, taught them how to cultivate corn, which is the opposite of what happened. So we should celebrate Columbus Day, because Native Americans contributed nothing, like for example the cultivation of corn, the industry of which made $63 billion in 2014. Shapiro claimed the video was satire, which no, unless you were making fun of what you actually think about Columbus Day, because it's just a slight exaggeration of what these arguments always are. After removing the satire video, Ben clarified that Columbus Day is worth celebrating. Despite some awful wrongs, Western civilization's cultivation of the Americas is a historical good, which is literally unknowable. It's the civil, facts don't care about your feelings of Ayn Rand's any white person who brought the element of civilization had the right to take over this continent. It's the not explicitly a racist version of Richard Spencer's
Have you ever for a second considered that if they were able to stay in the countries where they were born and lived and weren't forcibly removed, that those continents might be in a better state now?
I seriously doubt that.
The video lists off all of the things white people did after Christopher Columbus discovered America, like written language, mathematics, and philosophy, and broadly, books, despite the Native Americans' written languages and their almanacs, which were invented thousands of years before Europeans invented almanacs. Other post-Columbus contributions are medicine, even though Native Americans invented the syringe and had medicine, and had anesthetics, which the West didn't have until the mid-18th century. They contributed not scalping, which we've already covered, and football, which we'll cover. But also, Native Americans invented lacrosse, and they say horses as if there were horses in North America. There weren't. So when all is said and done, a little in column A, a little in column racist. Also, if we're really talking influence and innovation that contributed to the historical good, the American government was heavily based off of the Iroquois Confederacy. In 1988, the US Senate acknowledged the confederation of the original 13 colonies into one republic was influenced by the Iroquois Confederacy, as were many of the democratic principles which were incorporated into the Constitution itself. So instead of debunking the myth that settlers from the Mayflower gave the natives diseased blankets, while ignoring the fact that colonial officers in the 1700s literally wrote about giving diseased blankets to natives for the desired effect of killing them, it would be so much easier to admit that Christopher Columbus f***ing sucked. And that celebrating him is like the aliens in Independence Day arriving in a planet with lesser technology and some better technology, and various factions with some uncivilized and brutal behavior, giving 90% of us a deadly cold, partly by accident and then mostly on purpose, slaughtering most of the rest of us, and then celebrating goo-tentacled Mothership Day instead of Human Day, to remember and pay respect to the victims and cultures and civilizations lost to their terrible atrocities. Maybe it's just more respectful and historically and intellectually honest to just call Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day, to actually educate about our history.
How? Trigger warning.
And be honest about the gray areas. Then maybe alt-right journalists with White House press passes like Gateway pundits Lucien Wintrich or Petty Joke Junction, Tobey Maguire's cameo as Harry Potter in Twilight. Maybe he'll pause and think before tweeting pictures of a family giving the finger to Mount Rushmore while complaining about all these immigrants coming into our country, taking our stuff, and then insulting our history, only to hopefully at some point realize that, oh, those are Native Americans flipping off Mount Rushmore, a Lakota mountain called Six Grandfathers renamed after a lawyer from New York, and then carved with figures representing, among other things, the taking of native lands and depletion of the native people. I'm not going to say this was racist, but it did have to do with the something of their skin. Can we get the president to weigh in on this?
They don't look like Indians to me.
Good quote from the president. And it took us way too long to arrive at Columbus sucks, and all of your arguments against that have nothing to do with him, and are also pretty inaccurate and disingenuous. So hey, happy Disingenuous Peoples Day! It's 2017, and the Civil War started because of lack of compromise, despite there literally being compromises with compromise in the name. And also those compromises were about slavery, which people say the Civil War wasn't about, but of course it f***ing was. The Vice President of the Confederacy literally said in his speech, "Our new government is founded upon exactly this idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world, based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth." The truth being, Civil War was about slavery. Robert E. Lee was a traitor to America, so statues of him are dumb. Sure, that guy from earlier might say anyone with even a remote sense of military history knows what a brilliant General Lee was, except no, he lost, and that has nothing to do with him being a traitor who fought for slavery. Ah, that Hitler sure could give a speech. Let's give him statues. It's all just disingenuous trash spouted by liars and, yeah, racists. How is this a conversation we're still having? This is old news. We're taking a cue on the Civil War from Donald f***ing Trump? At his golf course in Virginia, there's a plaque commemorating the River of Blood, which is a thing he made up about battles that never happened, and when confronted about it by historians, he said, quote, "How would they know that? Where were they?" God, what a disaster. Thanksgiving's coming up. I wanted to talk about football. So okay, here's a segment we like to call Some Sports, about which I know quite a bit and in which I participate quite well. Football is so in the news, you guys. The president's mad that players are protesting for racial justice. People are arguing if there even is racial injustice. Papa John's blamed the NFL protests for dwindling pizza sales. Neo-Nazis claimed Papa John's to be the official pizza of neo-Nazis. And then Papa John asked neo-Nazis to please not buy their pizza. It's f***ing wild. It's a wild year. But this isn't an episode of some news, it's some old news. So here's some old news. Football was invented because the Civil War ended, and we were done exploring the frontier, so we needed new ways for young men to be violent. The similarities between war and football are pretty obvious, but it was a deliberate decision to keep alive the martial spirit. We needed a new way to be tough, to be men. So, football. First season of football ever, Rutgers and Princeton played each other 10 times. The second season, they added a third team, Columbia University, which, fun story, currently named after another word for America, Columbia, which is based off of Christopher Columbus, though the school was originally founded as King's College for King George II, but it was changed after the American Revolution against King George II's son George to reflect history and context. Anyway, football. Born from American anxieties about men becoming too soft, was also born from anxiety about race and how best to Americanize foreigners now that war and frontier times were over. One attempt was the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, started by Richard Henry Pratt in order to take Native Americans from their homes, strip them of their culture, and teach them how to be American. He often used the phrase, "kill the Indian, save the man." Though, to be fair, he did genuinely want to help them be accepted by the rest of America. But to be balanced, he also had them beaten if they used their native language. Anyway, again, Pratt formed a football team at the school, the Carlisle Indians, and they were so incredible and innovative, they made the game more popular, have the best winning percentage of any defunct college team, invented trick plays that eventually had to be prohibited, invented the play-action pass, and invented the overhand spiral throw, also known as throwing the football. So maybe Native Americans actually did kind of invent football? Speaking of football, head and body injuries. So many, in fact, and deaths in the early 20th century that the president at the time stepped in to institute safety regulations and rule changes to try to save lives, though he did write that he would not emasculate football. Teddy Roosevelt was very concerned about American manhood, which is why he so strongly supported the start of the Boy Scouts of America. Do we have a clip of a president being a man in front of the Boy Scouts of America?
Do you remember that incredible night with the maps? And the Republicans are red, and the Democrats are blue, and that map was so red it was unbelievable, and they didn't know what to say.
Didn't think so. But football is about preserving masculinity, with none of that femme prancing around. Do we have a clip of the president wishing football was more violent and dangerous?
Today, if you hit too hard, right? They hit too hard, 15 yards, throw him out of the game. They're ruining the game.
Thought so. That's right, the president is very obsessed with football. Tweets about it a lot. Twitter, by the way, not invented by Native Americans, so we should celebrate Columbus Day. But yeah, the president is pretty obsessed with yelling at football players for kneeling during the national anthem, after former NFL quarterback and current blackballed former NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick began protesting to bring attention to racial injustice. And to think, an athlete protesting. Imagine. And whether or not you agree with Kaepernick, he certainly has the right to protest, as do the other players. But it's being framed as disrespecting the flag, even though this country was built on protest and the freedom to protest. And the flag code says that you shouldn't put the flag horizontally, or use it in advertisements, or put it on disposable things like napkins, or wear it as a costume. And sure, the American Legion says you can wear articles of clothing that are red, white, and blue with stars and stripes, but it doesn't say costume. And in 1989, Congress revised the definition of the U.S. flag to include a U.S. flag or any part thereof made of any substance of any size in a form that is commonly displayed. And the flag should never be used as a receptacle for receiving, holding, carrying, or delivering anything. And the president needs to be reminded to put his hand on his heart during the national anthem and hugs the flag because when you're famous, they let you do it. He's not a bastion of flag respecting. And also, the flag code is merely a set of guidelines. And also, and I don't think the president knows this because it's on the last page of the flag code and, pages, but the president can alter the rules for presenting the flag to whatever the f he wants, whenever the f he wants. And that's true. Don't tell him. You know what's disrespecting the American flag at a sporting event? Confederate flags everywhere, for f***'s sake. In Germany, they outlawed Nazi symbols and gestures, so sometimes Nazis in Germany fly the Confederate flag instead. I wonder why, for f***'s sake. And actually, a year before the Carlisle Indians formed, our precious Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist, Francis Bellamy, who was also severely racist, anti-immigration, and worried that mingling with certain races would lower America's racial standards. But anywho, before World War II, we didn't put our hands over our hearts, we did what looked like a Nazi salute. So we stopped doing it. Well, a lot of us did. And instead, we put our hand over our heart. Well, most of the time. So maybe kneeling in protest isn't disrespecting the flag, but is it disrespecting the military? Well, opinions among veterans are pretty mixed on that. Some say yes, others say the right to protest is one of the reasons they fight. When Kaepernick first started his protest, he merely sat down during the anthem. But after talking about it with former Seahawk and Green Beret Nate Boyer, they decided a better way to protest while maintaining respect for the troops was to kneel. But who knows, maybe five-time draft dodger and proponent of using the military to go into Libya and take their oil, and also President Donald Trump might know better.
There's nobody bigger or better at the military than I am.
I am the most military-based and the most militaristic person on your show.
More about ISIS than the generals do, believe me.
You may not agree with Black Lives Matter protests or Kaepernick, but he can do it. And just consider that for hundreds of years, black people were seen as subhuman and were slaves in America. And then they were begrudgingly, via war, freed. And then laws were enacted to segregate and oppress them. And then 100 years of that institutional racism went by. And then we passed the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act. And then 52 years passed. And it's now. And there's no racism? Kaepernick's protest makes people uncomfortable, because race makes people uncomfortable, and Black Lives Matter protests make people uncomfortable. And the same was true during the Civil Rights Movement. It's why a lot of Confederate monuments went up during that period, out of spite. Here's a political cartoon from those days depicting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. conveniently labeled, saying, "I look forward to another nonviolent march tomorrow, but there's broken stuff around him," which sounds familiar because 2017 doesn't discriminate in terms of different periods of American history we have to keep reliving. People tell the NFL players to just shut up about politics and play football. But they didn't tell the president to shut up about politics and build hotels and fire people on TV for your entertainment. And athletics were meant to create leaders and to train young men to manage the burden of carrying on this country in the best way. So maybe it's okay to look to them. People call the players cowards for kneeling, but they're lending their voice to those who don't have one about something they're passionate about to make things better in the face of threats from their boss and literally the president of a country. And then they stand up and go play a game that causes brain damage to 99% of its participants. At this point, you might mention many of the greedy players' high salaries, which, fun story, got significantly higher in the NFL after Donald Trump bought a USFL team in the 80s and offered NFL players more money to play for him at the USFL, but instead they art of the dealed him and took offers of even more money at the NFL. Then Trump tried to destroy the NFL by convincing the USFL to move from the spring to the fall, defeating the entire purpose of having a second league, and the USFL collapsed, sued the NFL. Trump brought in his own lawyer, Harvey, quote, "he's the greatest," end quote, Meyerson, who was later jailed for a phony billing scheme. The USFL won $3, but only because antitrust settlements are tripled. And then Trump was like, oh well, and moved on to focus on casinos in Atlantic City, which also failed. And a year or two went by, and let's see, called to bring back the death penalty for 5 young black men who were proven to be not guilty. That's probably relevant to this conversation somehow. What's the topic of this conversation? Football, Native Americans, Thanksgiving? Yeah! Happy Thanksgiving, everybody! It's almost time for the turkey pardon, a dumb tradition that started in 1989, the year Donald Trump called to bring back the death penalty for 5 young black men who were proven to be not guilty. The first official turkey pardon was by George H.W. Bush in '89, but it was informally begun by American hero Ronald Reagan, who made a joke about pardoning a turkey after being asked too much about whether or not he would pardon Oliver North for crimes. Oh, if only we could live in the days when our president avoided questions about crimes and also probably has to pardon a lot of people he knows for crimes. So the turkey's coming up, and maybe he'll pardon it, or maybe he'll get rid of it, you know? That seems appropriate. He has a habit of showing up, f***ing things up, then leaving. And who cares? Pardoning turkeys is dumb and based off of the president avoiding important questions, and maybe he'll also destroy the NFL ultimately. And honestly, that's probably okay. There are a lot of reasons the NFL is bad. It's just unfortunate that the 2017 version of history says that the bad thing is this. Happy Thanksgiving! Gobble gobble! That's what the turkey says. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. In the early 2010s, the military paid the NFL millions of dollars to make sure they did patriotic displays before games like flyovers and the national anthem. That's relevant, right? That's relevant, right? Right? Right?